In this video, we are going to go over the primary way of staying safe in all of your lower body exercises. When it comes to the primary lifts, squat, deadlift, lunge, hinge, those are the four primary ways in which you're going to be working your lower body in the gym. And the number one thing to keeping yourself safe as well as increase strength is to ultimately control your pelvis. My pelvis, being the fact that it's attached to my spine, I can move 360 degrees, right? I can rock it forward, I can rock it back. So again, if I go like this and stick my butt out, that's what trainers call anterior pelvic tilt. If you think of your pelvis like a bucket holding water, if I dump the water out to the front, that would be anterior pelvic tilt. If I do the opposite and I tuck my hips under, now I'm pouring water out of the back, that would be posterior pelvic tilt. So in case you hear that and you want to know what that means, that's the direction. Tucking under, again, posterior, tucking forward, that would be anterior pelvic tilt. Now at the same time, looking at me from the front, I can elevate one side or the other. So my hip height right here, so if I go on my hip bones here, the ASIS, I can elevate here. I can also rotate forward and back, side to side, and that gives me my nice little salsa dance, right? 360 degrees range of motion. So as I am trying to transfer force from the ground through my legs, ultimately through my torso, because when I move, what's really moving? My arms move, my legs move, but they're trying to ultimately move my torso, which is everything attached to my spine. Pelvis attaches to the spine. Now, I have to transfer force from the ground through the legs into the spine, especially if I'm now holding a barbell, let's say on my back. If I'm carrying something in my arms, again, my spine has to be stable, but to have locomotion, to actually move, I have to actually transfer force, which again, starts from the foundation of the pelvis. Now, a lot of people get concerned with low back pain, low back issues. That low back pain is coming from, again, an improper control of the pelvis. So this is going to be foundational for every single lower body movement. It doesn't matter if I'm one leg, two legs, wide stance, narrow stance. Again, if I'm doing a regular squat pattern, which is going to be ankle, knee, and hip, all in motion, to transfer that, so at any point, you can see I can be moving my pelvis. So as I squat, let's say, if my pelvis tucks under, I'm gonna have problems with the spine. The opposite, too much this direction, is also gonna be true because your spine is meant to load forces axially, meaning straight up and straight down. So if I have a segment of my spine and in between is where those discs are and nerves that run out, when that gets pinched, and you can see if I open up one direction, it's gonna pinch on this side and this side's open. If I go the other way, now this side is being pinched. So we want to keep this as neutral as possible. So you're gonna hear me always talk about finding your neutral pelvis. So if I start from the side, most people, especially if you're sitting around all day, if you're sitting in cars, sitting at your desk, your hip flexors get tight. Your hip flexors, especially your psoas, actually attach on your spine, kind of up in this area, and they attach down here into your femur, your thigh bone, primarily on the inside, but it runs through your stomach and then attaches back here. So you imagine if all of that gets shortened, what is it gonna do? It's going to pull me like this. And so again, you see a lot of people, they're standing and their butt sticks out this way. Now, some other people, they have the opposite problem, right? They're kind of hunched over like this, and their butt's tucked under, so that when they go to squat, right, you get this, okay? We call this butt wink. Now, the opposite, some people try to avoid that, and with their tight hip flexors, they're squatting, but they're really sticking your butt out. I see this also a lot in my female lifters, because the females are thinking about their glute development, and they think that if you stick your butt out, you're gonna get more glutes. It's actually not true, so let me just dispel that myth. I'll go into more detail in a different video. However, good muscle development, period, is with proper loading. So the more weight I can lift, the more stimulus I can provide to the muscles, and it's gonna be time under tension. So again, if I do a really fast rep versus a slow controlled rep, there's more time under tension, and there's always a trade-off. The more time under tension, the less weight I can do. The more weight I can do, the faster I can't, or I should go, but even then, the heavier the weight, the slower I go. There's all these trade-offs, and that's where, again, we're gonna help you with all your programming. All that to say, the greater the stimulus, the greater the change. So if I am in bad position, I'm not gonna be able to do as much weight and do it correctly, and chances of injury goes up. So all that to say, if I'm starting off sideways, a lot of people are gonna be like this. So we're going to tuck our hips under without over tucking our hips. How do I tuck my hips under? That's glutes, because I'm gonna squeeze my butt, which drives me here, and I'm gonna use my low abs, which then pull my pelvis up. Again, in my rehab programs, why do we focus so much on glute activation and low ab strength? Because this is weak in everyone, and everyone's hip flexors are tight, and so they have tight hips, and they have tight low backs, and they're constantly like this. So with glutes, abs, tuck my hips under, and we find this neutral where my spine is straight up and down. Once I maintain this position, I'm going to use my breath, which again, I described in more detail in our breathing video. But again, just to reiterate here, when I breathe, I definitely am not up here in my chest. I'm going to breathe down here, but it's not just right here in my belly, in my gut. It's actually also here sideways. So if you see, if I push my thumbs in, I can breathe and literally push my thumbs out. And then the hardest part, again, is my back here. If I push my thumbs in, I can push my thumbs out this way. So what does that do? It's creating this tension, this breath, 360 degrees around my spine, which locks it in. That is what's protecting. So when people wear like a lifting belt, it's not the belt that's keeping you safe. The belt compresses you so that when I breathe, I push all this into the belt and I create this opposing force, which creates tension, and that's how we solidify this pelvis position and protect your spine. That is what is most important. Once my spine is protected, it's like having a 2x4. Again, if I were to push my finger, and I wanna push my finger into my hand, if my finger is rigid and I push, everything moves as one. But if I relax my finger, see now the finger goes like a noodle, and I'm not producing force here. So if I have a barbell up here, and my legs are pushing my pelvis and my spine, but if my pelvis and spine are a wet noodle, I'm not transferring force. I want that spine to move like a 2x4. So if I push here, everything goes up as one. So again, when you see people squat, right, they can't control the pelvis, which then hurts the back. They can't control their thoracic spine, which is the upper part. So then they collapse here. And as they collapse, guess what? They're either going to get hurt, they're going to fail the lift, or they can't squat any lower. So I'll get to the upper body in the next video. But for here, again, we control the pelvis. So first thing is, I'm not going to right now focus so much of this. That might be issues with the legs, other things going on. I'll talk about that in a second. But the first and the primary thing is, again, making sure we tuck the pelvis under with the glutes and abs, not too far, but again, find that neutral pelvis, which is what allows me to stand up nice and tall. I'm going to use my breath. That locks it in. And now when I squat, whether it's a hip hinge, so again, if I literally did what's called a good morning, see how this is staying flat the entire time. So that's my hip hinge. That would be like my RDLs. That would be like a good morning. All of this is more of a hip hinge. Even my wide stance squat is going to be more of a hip hinge type of squat because my hips go back. Whereas if I am more in a narrow stance, so now my knees have to go forward more, which is going to put me more in my quads. There's a little bit less of a hip hinge, but look, I'm not rounding this way, and I'm not sticking my butt out this way. I find my neutral, I breathe, I lock this in, and I perform my squat. But this, my spine from my head to literally my tailbone, work as one like a 2x4. Okay, so once again, when we start our squat or hinge patterns, find your neutral, lock it in glutes, abs, breathe, Now we do our squat pattern. And again, I could be in a lunge position. Same thing, I find my neutral, but my spine moves like a 2x4. I could be wide stance, hip hinge squat, narrow stance, more of a quad squat, RDL, good morning hip hinge, it doesn't matter. This stays in the exact same position, and that's what you have to control. So if I watch videos of you and you're letting me critique your movement, if it's a lower body exercise, it doesn't matter. Any lower body exercise, I'm going to watch you from the side to make sure that this is under control. Then I'm gonna look for you from the front. So if I do, let's say, a rear leg elevated, then that's where I see things like this happening. And that could come from, let's say, like a type hip flexor. It could mean that I'm tightening up this quad and I'm not driving the glute. So that's where this kind of stuff matters. However, that's easier to see. Or if, let's say, I'm doing a squat and I go to squat, but you see my hip goes to one leg. Let's say this leg is stronger, or let's say this leg is in pain. I'm either going to avoid pain and shift my weight, or naturally go to my stronger side. That's where we can see the pelvis in this direction, okay? So if that's the case, then we gotta work on control. We might work on different cues, because you'll see things routine like this. Someone goes to squat and their right knee collapses in, because maybe they're getting on their quad, maybe there's knee pain, maybe this glute med's not firing to drive this knee out. So we use some of those other cues. So from the front, we wanna make sure the pelvis stays level. And again, the legs need to be doing the same thing. If it's a bilateral or if it's a rear leg elevated, we gotta look at hip tightness, glute activation, those types of things. But from this video, the number one thing I want you to take away is we stay safe by controlling the pelvis. And the primary thing that you're gonna do in all leg exercises is always starting by tucking under slightly so that my spine is stacked. Find that neutral position here, lock it in, glutes, low abs, breathe, that 360-degree breath, and then go into whatever movement that you're gonna go into. That is gonna be fundamental. If you can do that and you can master that, you will see your strength gains go through the roof and your back will thank you for it.